There was a man who walked into Carl Jung's office in Zurich, 1932. Successful banker, beautiful wife, 2 children, everything society told him would make him complete. He sat down and said something that changed Jung's entire understanding of masculine psychology. "Dr. Jung, I have everything a man could want, but I feel like I'm dying inside. Every day I wake up and put on a mask, and I don't know who I am underneath anymore." Jung leaned forward and asked one question that would become the foundation of his life's work on masculine identity. "When was the last time you did something just because it set your soul on fire, not because someone expected it from you?" The man couldn't answer. He sat there in silence for 20 minutes, tears streaming down his face because he realized he had spent 15 years of his life being who everyone else needed him to be, and the man he actually was had vanished completely. But here's what they never told you about this story. That banker wasn't an isolated case. Jung discovered this pattern repeated itself in 70% of the married men who came to see him. Successful men, accomplished men, men who had done everything right according to society's blueprint, all reporting the same terrifying experience, the complete dissolution of their authentic self. And there's a reason this discovery has been buried in academic journals and kept away from mainstream consciousness. You see, there's a systematic program running in the background of modern civilization, and it has one primary objective: to convince men that sacrificing their deepest nature, their wildest ambitions, their truest self, is not just noble, it's the only path to love, acceptance, and meaning. But what if everything you've been conditioned to believe about love and sacrifice is actually a perfectly designed psychological trap? What if the very thing they've romanticized as the highest expression of masculinity, laying down your sword, your fire, your untamed spirit at the altar of partnership, is actually the mechanism through which your power gets systematically dismantled? Here's the question that will keep you awake tonight. What if I told you that society doesn't want you to sacrifice yourself for love because it makes you noble, but because it makes you controllable? Carl Jung spent 40 years studying the male psyche, and what he discovered was so dangerous to the social order that most of his work on masculine individuation remains largely unknown outside psychiatric circles. Jung understood something profound. The process he called individuation, becoming your true self, requires a man to journey into what he termed the shadow, the dark, unexplored territories of his own psyche, where his real power, his authentic desires, his uncivilized nature lives. But here's where it gets disturbing. Society has constructed an entire mythology around love and partnership that directly prevents this journey from ever taking place. They've turned love into a weapon of psychological domestication. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally alter how you see every relationship you've ever had, every choice you've ever made in the name of love, and the invisible forces that have been shaping your life from the shadows. The meeting between the conscious and unconscious, Jung wrote, is a painful process most people will do anything to avoid. And relationship, ironically, has become modern man's favorite avoidance mechanism. When a man falls in love, society celebrates. Family breathes a sigh of relief. Friends start planning bachelor parties. But nobody asks the crucial question Jung posed. Which self is falling in love? Is it your authentic self? The raw, uncivilized force Jung called the true individual? Or is it the persona, the carefully constructed mask you've built to gain social acceptance? Here's what Jung discovered in his clinical practice. Most men never meet their true selves. They go from living according to their parents' expectations to living according to their partner's expectations, from one form of psychological colonization to another, never once stopping to ask who they actually are when nobody is watching, what they actually want when it doesn't need to be justified to someone else, what they're actually capable of when they're not performing for approval. The hero's journey, which Jung studied extensively across cultures and mythologies, always begins the same way. The hero must leave the known world, separate from everything familiar, venture into the wilderness alone. Not sometimes, not eventually, always. Why? Because transformation requires isolation. You cannot become who you're meant to be while maintaining who everyone needs you to be. These are fundamentally incompatible processes. But modern relationship culture has inverted this entirely. Now we're told that leaving the known world, pursuing individual transformation, choosing periods of intense solitude. These aren't signs of strength but symptoms of commitment issues, fear of intimacy, emotional unavailability. We've pathologized the very process through which authentic masculine power emerges. Think about the men who changed everything. The artists, inventors, philosophers, empire builders who bent reality to their vision. Jung studied them obsessively. Newton, unmarried, discovering the fundamental laws of the universe in isolation. Beethoven, solitary, channeling divine music through disciplined solitude. Kant, never married, revolutionizing philosophy through uninterrupted contemplation. Tesla, alone, literally illuminating the world. Jung noticed a pattern that modern psychology desperately wants you to ignore. The men who touched greatness, who accessed what Jung called the collective unconscious and brought back treasures for all humanity. They protected their solitude like it was oxygen, not because they couldn't love, but because they understood something crucial. The journey to your deepest self cannot be made holding someone's hand. Your psyche doesn't negotiate. Your shadow doesn't compromise. Your individuation process doesn't pause for relationship maintenance. These are forces that demand total devotion, complete attention, and they will utterly destroy anything that tries to domesticate them. But society has built an elaborate system to ensure you never access these forces. It starts early, doesn't it? Boy meets girl, falls in love, society immediately begins the programming. Time to settle down, time to be responsible, time to put away childish dreams and build a life together. Notice the language. Build a life together, as if you don't already have a life, as if your individual existence was somehow incomplete, insufficient, waiting for partnership to grant it legitimacy. Jung called this the anima projection, and it's one of the most powerful psychological traps ever designed. Here's how it works. Inside every man exists what Jung termed the anima, the unconscious feminine aspect of the masculine psyche. This isn't about gender, it's about psychological completeness. The anima contains all the characteristics society has taught you to repress. Your creativity, your emotional depth, your intuition, your connection to the unconscious. Now, instead of doing the difficult inner work of integrating your anima, of becoming psychologically whole within yourself, society offers you a shortcut. Project that anima onto a woman, fall in love with your own unconscious feminine reflected in her, then spend the rest of your life trying to possess externally what you've refused to develop internally. It's brilliant, really, in its cruelty. You never become whole, you just become dependent. You never integrate your full self, you just become addicted to someone who seems to carry what you're missing. And the moment you commit to that external source of completion, the moment you say, I need you to be whole, you've surrendered the very thing Jung insisted was sacred, your psychological sovereignty. By the way, I'm curious, what city are you watching this from right now? I love knowing where in the world these ideas are landing, where men are starting to wake up to these patterns. Jung was absolutely clear about this. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate. Read that again slowly. When you don't do the inner work, when you don't face your shadow, integrate your anima, complete your individuation, you become a puppet of unconscious forces, acting out psychological patterns you don't understand, making choices that aren't really yours, living a life that looks like yours but belongs to invisible forces you've never questioned. And relationship becomes the primary stage where this unconscious drama plays out. You think you're choosing love, but you're actually avoiding yourself. You believe you're building intimacy, but you're actually outsourcing your psychological development. You imagine you're complete with her, but you've actually just stopped the painful process of becoming complete within yourself. This is why Jung observed that most marriages don't join two individuals but two personas, two masks. Two socially acceptable versions of people who have never met their authentic selves. The wedding isn't a celebration of love. It's a mutual agreement to keep each other's masks in place, to never dig too deep, to never demand the terrifying authenticity that real individuation requires. Here's where it becomes sinister. Society knows this. The entire social structure depends on it. A man who has completed his individuation, who has faced his shadow and emerged integrated and whole, who belongs entirely to himself, This man is fundamentally ungovernable. He can't be manipulated through shame, because he's faced everything shameful within himself. He can't be controlled through fear because he's already walked through his deepest terrors. He can't be bought with comfort because he's discovered something more valuable than security, himself. So society has built an elaborate trap disguised as the highest good. Love, partnership, finding your soulmate, building a life together. Every romantic comedy, every love song, every fairy tale, every social expectation, all carefully designed to convince you that your individual journey doesn't matter as much as finding someone to complete you. But Jung's psychology reveals the truth they're hiding. You're not incomplete. You've just been convinced you are, so you'll seek completion in ways that keep you domesticated, distracted, and controllable. The real journey, the hero's journey, individuation, it requires you to stop seeking yourself in another's eyes and start facing the terrifying depths of your own psyche. This is why the commitment to relationship and the commitment to individuation are often in direct conflict. One requires you to maintain stable identity for partnership harmony. The other requires you to destroy and rebuild yourself repeatedly. One asks you to be predictable and present. The other demands you disappear into transformative solitude. One wants you settled. The other wants you questing. You can do both, the culture insists, but Jung's clinical evidence suggested otherwise. The men who went deepest, who brought back the most valuable psychological treasure, they protected their solitude ferociously, because they understood transformation is not a part-time activity. You cannot individuate between relationship obligations. You cannot face your shadow while managing someone else's emotional weather. You cannot integrate your full self while maintaining the persona that makes partnership comfortable. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the transcendent function, the psychological process through which opposites within us synthesize into something new. But this process requires psychological energy, massive amounts of it, and relationship, even good relationship, even loving relationship, requires that same energy. Every conversation, every compromise, every emotional processing session, every act of partnership maintenance, it all draws from the same finite pool of psychological resources that individuation demands completely. So the man who chooses deep partnership often abandons his individuation journey not because he wants to, but because he simply runs out of energy. The psyche's deepest work gets postponed, then forgotten, then buried so deep he convinces himself it never mattered anyway. 20 years later, he's sitting in a therapist's office, successful, married, stable, wondering why he feels like a ghost haunting his own life. This is the sacrifice society actually wants from you. Not noble sacrifice, not love's sacrifice, but the sacrifice of ever discovering who you truly are. Because the man who knows himself, really knows himself, the man who has completed even partial individuation, he becomes dangerous to every system built on unconscious compliance. He can't be sold things he doesn't need because he knows what he actually values. He can't be shamed into conformity because he's integrated what society finds shameful. He can't be controlled through relationship leverage because he's psychologically complete within himself. This man doesn't need a relationship to feel whole, which means if he chooses relationship, he's choosing freely, not from desperation, not from incompleteness, not from unconscious psychological projection. And that changes everything. A conscious choice versus an unconscious compulsion, sovereignty versus dependence, integration versus projection. These aren't subtle differences. They're completely different universes of human experience. Jung observed something fascinating in his practice. The men who came to him in crisis, the ones experiencing what he termed the midlife individuation crisis, they all described the same phenomenon. They had built entire lives, careers, families, identities around being what others needed them to be, and suddenly, usually in their 40s, the authentic self they'd been suppressing for decades started screaming from the depths. But here's the tragedy. Most of these men were too embedded in their constructed lives to actually answer that call. They had mortgages, children, wives who married the persona, not the real man, entire social structures built around the mask they'd been wearing. So they medicated the crisis with affairs, with workaholism, with addictions, with anything that might quiet the voice demanding they finally become themselves. The few who actually answered the call, who chose the terrifying path of late individuation, they often had to dismantle everything they'd built. Not because the marriage was bad, not because they didn't love their families, but because everything in their life had been constructed by and for a false self, and the true self simply couldn't live there. Society calls this selfishness. Jung called it psychological necessity. The self, he insisted, demands to be born, and when a man has spent decades aborting that birth for social acceptance, the pressure eventually becomes unbearable. This is what they don't tell you when they're programming you with romantic narratives and relationship expectations. They don't mention that choosing partnership before completing your individuation means you'll probably build your entire life on a foundation of unconscious psychological patterns. They don't explain that the person you become in relationship is often a defensive adaptation, not your authentic self. They don't warn you that postponing your hero's journey for love usually means never taking that journey at all. Jung studied alchemy extensively because he recognized it as a symbolic map of psychological transformation. The alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold, but Jung understood they were actually describing the process of transforming the base material of unconscious personality into the gold of individuated consciousness. And every alchemical text emphasizes the same requirement. The work must be done in a sealed vessel, in isolation, protected from outside interference. You cannot complete the great work in a crowded room. You cannot achieve psychological gold while maintaining social obligations. The transformation requires heat, pressure, focus, and above all, solitude. Modern men are told the opposite. You should be able to maintain relationship, career, social life, and somehow also find time for deep psychological work. But that's not how transformation works. Real change, fundamental identity level change, requires you to withdraw from normal life, to create sacred isolation where the old self can die and something new can be born. This is why monks seek monasteries, why mystics seek caves, why artists seek studios, why philosophers seek solitude, not because they hate people, but because becoming requires separation. The seed must be buried in darkness to sprout. The caterpillar must seal itself in the cocoon to transform. The man must retreat from society's demands to discover who he actually is beneath the roles and expectations. But relationship, especially modern relationship, actively prevents this withdrawal. She needs to know where you are, what you're thinking, why you're distant. Fair requests from her perspective, but death sentences for psychological transformation. The process Jung described requires periods of what looks like madness from the outside. Confusion, disorientation, the dissolution of old identity before new identity emerges. You cannot explain this process to someone who needs you to remain stable and recognizable. You cannot maintain relationship harmony while your psyche is tearing itself apart to rebuild itself stronger. So most men choose relationship stability over psychological transformation, and they spend the rest of their lives wondering why they feel incomplete despite having everything society promised would complete them. Jung called this living in participation mystique, a state of unconscious psychological fusion with others where you've never separated enough to discover your individual identity. Children live in participation mystique with parents. Many adults never leave it, they just transfer it from parents to partners. The wife becomes the new source of identity, the new authority you're trying to please, the new force you've surrendered your sovereignty to. And society celebrates this surrender, calls it commitment, calls it love, calls it growing up. But Jung knew it was actually arrested development, the refusal to complete the painful separation that individuation demands. Here's what makes this so insidious. The trap is baited with real goods. Love is real, companionship is real, partnership can be genuinely beautiful. But these goods are being used to prevent something more fundamental, your encounter with your complete self. It's like being offered a comfortable cage with great amenities. The cage is nice, the bars are gilded, but you're still trading freedom for security, sovereignty for comfort, your potential for stability. Jung warned about this explicitly. The meeting with oneself is at first the meeting with one's own shadow, and most people will do anything to avoid that meeting. Relationship becomes the perfect avoidance mechanism. Instead of facing what's dark, chaotic, uncivilized within yourself, you focus on managing relationship dynamics. Instead of integrating your own unconscious, you project it onto your partner and try to control it externally. Instead of becoming whole yourself, you create the illusion of wholeness through fusion with another. But the shadow doesn't disappear because you're ignoring it. It grows stronger, more insistent, more destructive. Eventually it bursts out in ways you can't control. Affairs, rage, depression, addiction. These aren't random symptoms, they're your unintegrated self demanding attention. And by then you've usually built so much life around the false self that acknowledging the true self would require demolishing everything. This is the real sacrifice society wants from men. Your authentic power, your individual journey, your direct relationship with the depths of your own psyche. They want you to sacrifice these things not to some noble cause, but to the maintenance of social stability, economic productivity, and psychological predictability. A man who is individuated is wild, unpredictable, sovereign. He's fundamentally free, and free men are dangerous to systems built on control. So they domesticate you through love, through partnership, through making you responsible for someone else's happiness, through convincing you that your individual journey is somehow selfish compared to relationship obligations. But Jung's work reveals the lie. The only truly selfish act is refusing to become who you actually are. Because your full individuation, your complete psychological development, that's not just for you. It's the gift you have to offer the world. Every man who completes his individuation makes it easier for others to complete theirs. Every man who faces his shadow and integrates it removes that much darkness from the collective unconscious. Every man who becomes psychologically whole and sovereign contributes to human consciousness evolution. But the man who sacrifices his individuation for relationship, he's not making a noble sacrifice. He's committing a betrayal against his own potential and against what he could have contributed to human development. Society would rather have you comfortable and controllable than powerful and free. They would rather have you dependent on relationship for identity than sovereign within yourself. They would rather have you projecting your psychological work onto others than actually doing that work internally. And they've built an entire mythology of love and sacrifice to ensure you make the choice they want you to make. Jung spent his life trying to wake men up to this trap. The self, with a capital S, which he defined as the totality of conscious and unconscious psyche, is not found in relationship. It's found in the terrifying journey into your own depths. Not discovered through love, but through the alchemical process of psychological transformation that requires solitude, focus, and the courage to face everything within yourself that you've been taught to fear or suppress. The individuated man doesn't need a partner to feel complete, because he's achieved internal psychological wholeness. This doesn't mean he won't choose relationship, but when he does, it's from abundance, not lack, from sovereignty, not dependence, from consciousness, not unconscious compulsion. He's not looking for someone to complete him because he's already complete. He's not seeking his anima externally because he's integrated it internally. He's not trying to escape his shadow through partnership because he's faced it and incorporated its power. This creates an entirely different kind of relationship. Conscious partnership between two sovereign beings rather than unconscious fusion between two incomplete halves. But society doesn't teach you how to get there, because society needs you incomplete, needs you dependent, needs you looking outside yourself for what can only be found within. Jung's final warning was clear. Individuation is not optional for those who hear the call. You can postpone it, avoid it, medicate it, but you cannot eliminate it. The self demands to be born, and the longer you delay, the more violent the eventual crisis becomes. The men in their 40s experiencing complete identity collapse. They're not having breakdowns, they're having breakthroughs that were postponed for decades. The psyche is finally forcing the individuation that should have happened earlier. But by then the cost is enormous because they've built entire lives around false selves. How much better to face this earlier? To prioritize your individuation before you've created complex structures that depend on you remaining unconscious. How much wiser to complete your hero's journey before you invite someone else into your life. How much more powerful to integrate your shadow, develop your anima internally, discover your authentic self, and then, if you choose relationship, enter it as a complete sovereign being. This is the path Jung mapped, but society actively discourages, because it produces men who cannot be controlled through the usual mechanisms. Men who know themselves completely are immune to manipulation, resistant to social programming, incapable of living according to scripts written by others. These men are dangerous, not because they're destructive, but because they're free, and freedom is always threatening to systems built on control. You're standing at this crossroads right now, whether you realize it or not. Down one path is everything society has prepared for you: relationship, partnership, building a life together, sacrificing your individual journey for love's comfort, postponing your psychological development for social acceptance, becoming what others need instead of who you actually are. It's the path most traveled, well-lit, approved, celebrated. Your family will be happy. Your friends will understand. Society will reward you for making the expected choice. And you'll spend quiet moments for the rest of your life wondering who you could have become if you'd been brave enough to take the other path. Down that other path lies something rarer and more demanding: individuation, the complete psychological development Jung mapped, the hero's journey into your own depths, the alchemical transformation of your base self into gold. This path requires solitude, requires you to withdraw from normal social life, requires you to face everything within yourself you've been avoiding. It offers no guarantees except one: you will meet yourself completely, and that meeting will either destroy you or forge you into something extraordinary. Jung promised that those who complete this journey, who face their shadow and integrate it, who develop their anima internally, who encounter the self and survive, they access what he called the transcendent function. They become psychologically whole, sovereign, capable of creating from depths others never touch, living with intensity others never know, contributing to human consciousness in ways others never achieve. But the cost is everything you thought you were, everything others expected you to be, every comfortable identity you've been hiding behind. The choice before you isn't between good and bad. It's between comfortable unconsciousness and terrifying consciousness, between living someone else's script and writing your own, between sacrificing yourself for love's illusion and claiming yourself for truth's reality. Most men never really choose. They just drift toward the path of least resistance, wake up one day wondering how they got where they are, spend the rest of their lives managing regret. But you're different. The fact that you've watched this far means something inside you has already begun to wake up. Some part of your authentic self is trying to break through the persona you've been maintaining. Jung would tell you to listen to that voice. No matter how inconvenient its demands, how disruptive its truth, how threatening its message to your current life structure, that voice is yourself trying to be born, and ignoring it won't make it go away. It will only make the eventual crisis more devastating. The question isn't whether you'll face your individuation, it's whether you'll face it now while you still have freedom to choose, or later when crisis forces it upon you. Every day you postpone this journey is a day your authentic self remains buried. Your real power stays dormant. Your full potential goes unrealized. Every compromise you make to maintain comfortable relationship while avoiding uncomfortable psychological work is another brick in the prison you're building around your true nature. Every time you choose social approval over authentic development, you're voting for a life of quiet desperation over a life of terrible beauty. Now I want you to do something that will require more courage than you might realize. Write in the comments, "I choose myself." 3 words that signal you're ready to stop sacrificing your individuation for social comfort, ready to face your shadow instead of projecting it onto others, ready to become psychologically whole even if it means walking parts of this journey alone. The men who write those 3 words, they're the ones who understand that real love doesn't require you to sacrifice yourself. It requires you to become yourself completely first. They're the ones who recognize that society's version of sacrifice is actually a trap designed to keep you controllable, manageable, predictable. Write those 3 words. Let's see how many men are ready to stop living unconscious scripts and start their real hero's journey. Click that subscribe button because you're going to need support on this path. You're going to need reminders when society tries to pull you back toward comfortable unconsciousness. You're going to need a community of men who understand that individuation isn't selfish, it's sacred. Hit that like button if Jung's psychology resonates in places words can't quite reach. If you feel something ancient inside you recognizing truths you've always known, but never had language for. And pay attention to the next video that's coming, because we're going to explore something even more dangerous than what we covered today. We're going to examine the specific psychological mechanisms society uses to interrupt your individuation journey, the exact moments when most men abandon their authentic development, and the precise strategies Jung developed for protecting your psychological sovereignty in a world designed to destroy it. The information coming next will give you tools to navigate this journey, weapons to defend against the forces trying to domesticate you, maps to guide you through territories your psyche must cross. This isn't just theory. This is the practical psychology of becoming ungovernable, sovereign, complete. Everything you've learned today is preparation for what comes next.